Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here, and it's an honor to be able to speak to you all today. Today, we're just kicking off the second week of COP, and as you know, today is Health Day, and we know that the climate crisis is a health crisis, and we also know that fossil fuels are making us sick. So I'm going to let you hear from the physicians themselves and public health workers. My name is Dr. Leah Temper. I work with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. I'm the Director of Health and Economic Policy, and I will turn it immediately to our speakers who are going to talk about the health community's call to phase out fossil fuels to protect human health. And the first speaker is Arti Kosya from Climate Trends. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Today is the first day for me at the COP, and the real situation on ground where I come from in Delhi is so far removed from the discussions that we are having in windowless rooms here that it brings me here to talk about the conditions that we as Delhiites are facing. It's not about finding problems alone, because a lot of the reality does lie in solutions, but I think it's really important to lay the facts bare as they stand. Delhi's air quality index today is close to 450 on an average and 1,000 in many parts of the city. There is a low-cost monitor in my friend's house, and the recording over there is 1,500 AQI. AQI, which is the air quality index as it conveys, was established to show how multi-pollutants have an effect on public health. The fact that no single source of pollution is going to be the worst, but because there will be many, which will include black carbon, which will include ozone, which will include fumes from fossil burning, fumes from burning of farm fires, so on and so forth, really makes us come to a point where we'll have to look at solutions which are also multidisciplinary. Delhi was sitting at a moment 3 weeks ago at the Diwali evening when our air quality was better than previous Diwalis, and that was because the farm fires up north were far less as compared to what they have been in previous years. But the fact that climate as well as air quality intersect with each other in very complex ways is escaping nobody's attention. As the temperature has dropped, as the La Nina has been very poor, which means the wind circulation is quite poor, the air is stable and the pollutants are continuing to hang in the air. I think our subsequent speakers will talk about how impacts on public health have been established and proven, not just by researchers across the world, but by researchers based in India, that air quality impacts people from head to toe. It's not just the respiratory impacts on the vulnerable, it's the respiratory impacts that happen to healthy people when air quality levels exceed beyond 300 AQI, which is the condition which is in Delhi at the moment. It's also impacts on people's cardiovascular health can be witnessed by the increased number of OPDs in hospitals, by increased impacts on respiratory diseases, as well as increased impacts on psychological, cognitive diseases, which are increasing over a period of time. I am a Delhiite, and I can labor on, and I can tell you several anecdotes of how friends, family are suffering. I think the reality lies in trying to find out solutions, which the government of Delhi is trying and striving for, but it is also the fact that the level of pollutants that are existing today really require a range of solutions at a level which is not retroactive. The Graded Response Action Plan has been in place today, which is the emergency response measures. But the way, I just learned that Lahore has been facing the same problem. They have tested things which are temporary, like artificial rain. The cities of Lahore and Multan are in a lockdown. Delhi has been facing this problem. Further down from Delhi, there is the entire Indo-Gangetic Plain, which faces the same problem. The fact that a lot of issues are transboundary, a lot of problems have solutions which are beyond country boundaries and beyond state and city limits. And the fact that we are all gathered here to talk about bigger issues that affect our climate, and we are dragging so much there is so much foot dragging in how much we can be responsive to the realities of climate change in the world. I think it's almost living in a bipolar world, and that's how I see the difference between how the difficulties are happening to people who are facing impacts of climate change and how far we are in terms of talking about solutions which are not just important, but they're also an emergency from the point of view of health. I will pause here.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Enkun Biambadorj, the founder of Breathe Mongolia, and I will ask the speakers, please keep your comments to 3 minutes, and afterwards we will have about hopefully 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the press. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Enkun, and I run a nonprofit called Breathe Mongolia. We work at the intersection of climate, clean air, and health in Mongolia. And the problem is really similar in Mongolia as well. In my home city, or the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, in the winter it gets down to negative 40 degrees, and sometimes even colder than that. And because it gets that cold, and because of the lack of access to clean and safe energy infrastructure, people are forced to burn coal for heating. And associated with that, air pollution season starts in the winter. And we no longer have a winter season, we call it the air pollution season. And this air quality problem is inextricably tied with climate, because a lot of people who are moving into cities are actually climate migrants themselves, who used to be herding families, who've lost their herd in extreme cold snaps that are increasing in intensity and number because of climate change. And so they are forced to move into urban areas, into cities, into provincial centers, where the infrastructure does not allow for the population growth that is currently happening right now. And so because of this, people are forced to burn coal, and the health impacts are, again, I could go on and on. There are some statistics that say, and these are research that came out quite a long time ago, that 1 in 10 deaths in my city is attributable to air pollution. And that for children, for a child's lung capacity for someone who lives in a polluted part of the capital city compared to a child who lives in the countryside with clean air, their lung function is 40% lower. So the mortality and morbidity tolls are absolutely horrendous. But I think the more deeper insidious problem is that this quantitative number of the health toll will never be enough for the fossil fuel industry and for coal industries. Because the narrative that surrounds the fossil fuel industry, I think, is very strong. This narrative of development, economic growth, the developing world catching up with the developed world. I think we need to work at these very narrative levels in order to combat air quality and also climate change. I think the other thing that we need to recognize is that air pollution is an economic and political choice that we make. It's not just something that happens, it is a choice that policymakers and decisions and we make as society. And it's a choice that we make at the expense of the health of children, of young people, of our future generations, of everyone. My last point is that what we think of as breathing air quality, I think we also need to change our framing here. We often say we're breathing PM 2.5, PM 10, and yes, that's true on a scientific level, but on a deeper level, what we're breathing is actually the climate crisis itself. And if we are to address these problems at their roots, we need to be addressing these more narrative issues and the way that our economies and our societies and our political spheres frame the discourse around air quality and fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Dr. Joe Vipond, who is the past president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment.
Thanks for lending me your attention for the next 3 minutes. And this is really important. In distress over the influence of the fossil fuel industry at COP, we at CAPE have recently drafted this statement calling leaders to treat fossil fuels like big tobacco. Dear parties and global health leaders, as doctors, health professionals, and representatives of the global health community, we share the concern expressed in the recent Club of Rome letter regarding the increasing influence of the fossil fuel industry in climate negotiations. We would like to add our voices to the call for reform informed by decades of health sector experience with tobacco control. The World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the first treaty negotiated under WHO's auspices, revolutionized how we address harmful industries with egregious conflicts of interest interfering in the process of saving millions of lives. The treaty reaffirmed the right of all people to the highest standard of health and created a paradigm shift by addressing both supply and demand. Through Article 5.3, it explicitly protects public health policies from commercial influence, a protection notably absent in climate policy, where over 1,773 fossil fuel lobbyists attended COP29 alone. As health workers in the front lines of fossil pollution-related health risks, from air pollution to extreme weather disasters, we believe it is increasingly imperative to put in place a similar mechanism to address the influence of the fossil fuel industry. Air pollution alone caused 7 to 8 million premature deaths annually, rivaling tobacco's death toll, while the WHO rightly calls the climate crisis the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. The parallels between tobacco and fossil fuel industries are unmistakable and damning. Both industries knowingly marketed lethal products, actively suppressing clear evidence of health harms, orchestrating doubt about scientific evidence, and spending billions to obstruct health protective regulations. To protect human health, we call for strict limits on lobbying of the fossil fuel industry to protect public health. Tobacco lobbyists are banned from health policy meetings because they were shown to obstruct health protection measures. We must similarly end fossil fuel industry's outsized influence on climate negotiations and protect against their attempts to delay, dilute, and weaken effective life-saving climate legislation. Their presence at the climate talks is inappropriate as tobacco companies at health conferences. Secondly, we propose a ban on fossil fuel advertising and sponsorship. The Tobacco Control Convention's restrictions on the advertising and promotion of cigarettes is considered a tobacco control best buy for demand reduction, reducing smoking rates, and saving lives. Health workers are calling for a comprehensive ban on advertising, promotion, and sponsorship of fossil fuel products, which continue to undermine efforts to transition away from fossil fuel use. With 99% of humanity breathing unsafe air, the health case for action is irrefutable. Success in tobacco control, which has saved an estimated 37 million lives since 2003, demonstrates what is possible when health takes precedence over corporate profits. We need a fossil fuel control convention to save lives. We call on the global health stakeholders to draft a resolution to develop an international fossil fuel control instrument for adoption by the WHO, similar to the 2003 Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And we urge all parties to champion this initiative and put in place such measures in their national legislations. The health of humanity and the planet hangs in the balance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vipand. And I now turn to Dr. Courtney Howard, the chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance. Dr. Howard.
Thank you. I'm the vice chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance, and I'm also the president-elect of the Northwest Territories Medical Association. I'm an emergency physician in the subarctic in Canada. We serve a majority Indigenous population that extends all the way up to the high Arctic and covers an area larger than France and Spain combined. I woke up today to an email from my department head saying, we are having an incredibly difficult time keeping this emergency department open. Healthcare workers are exhausted from the pandemic. Resources around the world are inadequate. And what we're seeing is that our governments are still subsidizing fossil fuels $1.4 trillion a year in 2022, according to the 2024 Lancet Countdown report. In many countries, the subsidies we are offering to our fossil fuel companies, which are making, as we know, record profits, are similar to the amount that we are spending on healthcare. We're seeing that at least 5 million deaths a year are as a result of fossil fuel-related air pollution specifically. Those are deaths from heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cancer. These are the things that kill our loved ones. These are keeping our children out of school because of air pollution warnings, because of asthma exacerbations. That means our emergency departments become overwhelmed. People can't go to work. The health and economic costs are staggering, and they haven't been counted. I also live downstream from the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. Ariel Deranger is in the audience. We've been asking for a proper study into the local health impacts of the oil sands since I started doing this work 13 years ago. So we haven't even actually counted the true local health impacts of resource extraction, and that's in a democratic high-income country. Imagine what this is like in the fossil fuel producing areas of the South. We need to fund healthcare instead of fossil fuels. We've recently passed a pact for the future. We've agreed as humanity that we care about our children, we care about those unborn. We know that the major reason that people act on climate is to take care of our children. We need to act out of love, fund what helps love, fund what helps well-being, stop funding fossil fuels, and start funding healthcare with those dollars. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for speaking about the health impacts of fossil fuel pollution from cradle to grave, from extraction to the emissions that are going into the atmosphere. And I would like to now invite questions from the media. So I'll take 3 questions at a time and I'll pass them to the panel. Please do present yourself before you ask your question and say where you're from. Sorry for my voice.
No, it's all right. I'm Vishnu Mohan from Times of India newspaper. In fact, my question is to Aarti, another panelist. Aarti knows the topography. We are talking about the Delhi pollution. So Aarti knows the topography. And there are multiple factors responsible for air pollution. Of course, vehicular emission is one of the important reasons. And that's why we're talking about here the fossil fuel, in fact, to phase out the fossil fuel. And the people are also pitching for the EVs as a solution to deal with the air pollution. So how far it would be correct to pitch for EV to solve this problem? Because EV can, at the best, reduce the pollution in the city where people use EVs. But you produce the same electricity to feed the EVs in the countryside, which is run based on coal. So what can be the solution when so many people depend on vehicle? Of course, public transportation is one of the solutions, but in the city where multiple factors are at play, how to deal with this pollution, how to deal with this kind of problem. And of course, we have seen in most of the cities in South Asia, and particularly in Delhi, there must be some lack of political will to deal with this problem. So how to deal with the issue, because fossil fuel, you can't just stop using fossil fuel. The transition will take time. What would be the solution?
Thank you. We have another question. We'll take a few questions.
I'm Jayashree Nandi from Hindustan Times. I write on climate and environment. And I wanted to ask the physicians here, you know the levels that Delhi and NCR is recording at the moment. They have topped the charts in terms of AQI. And in such a condition where we are seeing continuous exposure for, say, 5 days or a week to very high air pollution levels, what are the kind of health impacts that we expect to see? Thank you.
We'll take one more question. We can take 2 more questions, and then I'll pass it to the panel.
Hi, I'm Vandita from Carbon Copy India. I want to ask the health professionals here that, is there a space for health professionals to come into policymaking? Like, are these kind of discussions held in your region where policymakers are reaching out to you? What are those spaces looking like? What are those conversations looking like? Are there lessons that you think exist in other countries where other countries can learn from? And yeah, like, what is the interaction with policymakers like when it comes to the intersection of health and climate change? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the last question over there.
Hi, my name is Tato Habaitse. I'm a climate justice advocate and gender equality change maker. from the global south. So for some of us, our countries can't really afford to perform studies, as you had been mentioning about the health impacts of fossil fuels and all of those issues. But we are experiencing and we are seeing a deterioration of health issues and how there isn't really money to perform those studies, and also there is that dwindling finance towards addressing those health impacts and other issues that are cropping up, such as mental health issues and CNR issues. How can we as civil society not advocate, but how can we channel our efforts in ensuring that our countries do have that kind of finance to support the arguments on such issues? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll now give each of the panelists about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. And afterwards, if any journalist would like to speak to us further, you can find us outside in the front of this room. Please, you can start, Arti.
I'll start with the question from the Times of India colleague, and it's true, you and I know more about the specifics of Delhi than others, but just for the benefit of everybody, Delhi's problem is mixed sources, and at best, transport contributes about 20 to 22% to air quality, and other factors like farm fires as well, but also burning of fossil fuels, power plants make a contribution. With regards to specifically the problem of transport and it being addressed by electric vehicles, I think it will only partly solve the problem, even if we were to fully transition to electric vehicles. The fact of the matter, in a city like Delhi, which is 2 million people, really is 20 million people, really is that you need transport management. You know, we've all seen how vehicles are idling at traffic lights, how we have emissions even happening where we could avoid them on the tailpipe. So local problems really need local solutions and need to be managed at that level. As a Delhiite, I actually believe that management and mitigation well in advance is a better action than retroactively and retrospectively trying to manage and coming up with emergency response measures when air quality hits 500 on the AQI and thereabouts. So I think it's the management which is important, and similarly management as well when it comes to agricultural farm burning, which contributes on the days when it's a peak to even 40% of Delhi's air quality, and when it's not a peak, it's 2 to 3% of its problem. So I think that's really what is important. On the question from the colleague about what a civil society can do in terms of advocating, I mean, I think my opinion really is that no matter what everybody else does, significant changes can come if better regulation and better policy is made. So if people like us can even push for better regulation and policy, we at least apply the lever where we must, so that the improvements can help take shape much faster, because otherwise the pace at which we need change will never match the pace at which incremental action will be taken. So I think the role of CSOs is pretty much to bring radical change.
Thank you. And Kun.
I'll address the last two questions, as I think they're more pertinent to my experience. First, on the point of health professionals, I mean, I'm not a health professional myself, I'm not a decision maker myself, but in my context, what I found is that actually a lot of health professionals themselves need capacity building in order to advise patients on how to protect themselves in air pollution heavy seasons. One of the stories that recently health professionals have told me is that they have started telling families and people who want to have children not to have children in certain times of the year, or to, when they become pregnant, to go outside of the city, and as much as possible after having their child to spend however many months outside of the city. And I mean, you know, it's really hard, that's really hard to implement, but advices like this that are very sort of grounded and they come from capacity building, and I think that is also needed as well. And I think similarly to how to reach decision makers, there's a lot of capacity building that's needed over there. And on the last question about how to ensure that studies, that money is going to the right studies, I mean, if we look at the State of Air report that comes out from the Health Effects Institute, if we look at the reports that come out from the Clean Air Fund, we know that majority of the funding surrounding clean air is not going to the places where it should be, where there are studies lacking. And I think importantly here is, I mean, I also work at the civil society sector, so what I think is useful is to make those connections yourselves with academia, with professionals, with universities, and to say, let's find grants together, let's apply for things together, and to implement studies that have a both scientific basis but also a community basis, because civil society provides the more community outreach aspect. So I think those intersectoral collaborations.
Thank you. Dr. Joe Vipond.
We're almost out of time, so I'm happy to take any questions outside. I'll defer my time to Dr. Howard, but I would like to talk, if anybody wants to, about coal. It's been underrepresented here today, and also that there's great things happening in civil society in the medical field.
Thank you. So when air pollution levels are as high as they are in Delhi today, what will be presenting to emergency departments are people with breathing problems, from asthma, from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. People will be coming in with chest pain due to heart attacks that get worse. Strokes are made worse by high levels of air pollution. On a more chronic basis, it does increase risks to newborns. Where I live, in fact, we have the highest levels of air pollution from wildfires. So in the summer of 2014, we had 2.5 months of wildfire smoke that resulted in a doubling of emergency department visits for asthma. And in 2023, 70% of the population of my territory was evacuated due to severe wildfires, including my 100-bed subarctic hospital. It required a military evacuation plane to take our patients thousands of kilometers south to Vancouver. So thinking about health systems adaptation, that is expensive. This is a high-income country. We have the ability to go to our federal government for help. And in a lower-income country, small island developing states, that requires grants. So we tend to exist in this place where people tell us there isn't enough money for healthcare. And the thing is, we do not live in a world of scarcity. We are giving $1.4 trillion in subsidies to giant multinational corporations who are making record profits. We have a power problem that is related to the fossil fuel industry. We need to use the power of our love for health, for well-being, for future generations to overwhelm the power of the fossil fuel industry and reallocate fossil fuel subsidies to that which is good, that which preserves health for current and future generations, to fund health and healthcare.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank all the speakers, and I would like to also thank the UNFCCC and the World Health Organization for the work they've been doing at this conference, highlighting the importance of health in pushing forward as the argument for climate change. And I'd just like to thank the speakers for highlighting that, of course, this is a question of justice, of who is actually paying the costs for fossil fuel extraction and pollution, and that we need to begin to put profits, put lives before profits. So thank you, all of you, for coming. And as I mentioned, the speakers are happy to take questions outside.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. On to the next one. Oh, go ahead. Thank you. I don't think so, but I will grab it. Yeah.